This is Choose the Bear, where we dive deep into the power and joy of living a vibrant, independent life on your own terms. This podcast is your go-to source for smart, fun, and insightful conversations about what it means to embrace independence and live the life you choose. I'm Kat Calvin, and together we'll explore how this movement is challenging outdated stereotypes, redefining success, and empowering people to live their best independent lives. Today is a great day because we're talking about money. Yay! We've got Jay Zigmont on, who is just a fabulous writer and researcher about child-free money, child-free wealth, etc. He's got a new book, The Childfree Guide to Life and Money, which I really liked. I'm a total finance geek. I've read all the books. I do all the things. I've had the same budgeting spreadsheet for like 20 years, which I love. But I learned so much from the book, from Jay. I have started implementing some of his practices. I also have some things that I have to do that he made very clear, like write a will, which I have just been avoiding. So it was a really good episode. I really recommend it. There's a link to the book in the show notes. It's a great buy for yourself or for anyone who you think needs some help planning for the future, which is all of us. And particularly, we've talked a little on this podcast before about how there are just different things that you have to think about if you are child-free, if you are single, about how you're going to plan for the future, about what you get to do with your money that maybe you don't if you have kids, etc. And so having Jay on was really, really great for being able to talk through a lot of that. And his book, I think, is a good guide to just take with you through life as you're working on these different issues. And he really has something for people regardless of where you are financially. And, it's a good place to start if you're really young, or if you are older and closer to retirement, he's got some things for you too. So I thought it was helpful. I really like this conversation. I really like talking about the nitty gritty, like nuts and bolts of like, okay, let's talk about money. Let's talk about other things. If you do too, comment or send an email, because I am always looking for more folks who have this kind of info. So let me know if it's helpful. And please don't forget to rate and review. It is really helpful as well. Thanks so much. Hello, everyone. Today is going to be very educational. I suggest that you pull out a pen and a paper and prepare to take notes, or perhaps even listen to this and then buy the book we're going to talk about and then come back and listen again while you're going through the book, because there is so much good information in here that I've already been like tabbing and working and etc. So I'm really, really excited. We are here with the marvelous Dr. Jay Zigmont, author of The Childfree Guide to Life and Money. We all think it is the only book written about money specifically for child-free people, which is so exciting. So hello, Jay. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. It sounds like I should give you a quiz to see how you've been doing on reading it,
Well, we'll see by the questions I ask. If they're all from the first 10 pages, then I'm lying. Before we start talking about the book, though, tell us, who are you? What do you do? Give us your life story.
So I actually started on this path because my wife and I are child-free. And when I was studying to become a CFP, the thing is, there was absolutely nothing in any of the financial literature about living a life without kids. It all says you either have kids, you're going to have kids, or, empty nest. And I started with this question of are me and my wife weird? Which we're weird. I mean, we're two PhDs. We sit around and talk about research studies at night. We're weird, but are we weird for being child-free in the life we're living? And I didn't know at the time that 25% of the US are child-free or permanently childless. It's a huge number. And since then, I've been researching, 3-4 years here and, working through what happens to your life and finances when you're child free. And it turns out it changes just about everything.
It does. I want to dive into some specific things, but I have to say, your book has the best use of QR codes that I've ever seen in a book. Perhaps the only time I've seen it in a book, but it's so great when you listeners, when you buy the book, which I know you're going to, there's all these diving deeper QR codes, and then you scan them, and there's more information. There's spreadsheets, there's resources. It's so good, and especially because it's approachable, but there's also a lot of information. And so being able to have these dive deeper things, like I haven't even gotten through half of them. And every time it's like, oh, this is really helpful. And it makes it feel doable. Because one of the things we're going to talk about is how much there is to think about. And it feels like, oh my God, even I, who am a real geek and think about a lot of these things, and I'm a lawyer, and I still was like, oh God, I have to think about that too. And so you've broken it up into pieces. You have the dive deeper things. I really, really love that about this book.
Yeah, except everybody in publishing hates those because I had to keep like 101 links accurate, and like don't ask my team to ever do that again. They told me I'm never allowed to put links in a book ever again. But hey, I liked it.
I was thinking about it because I remember going through the accuracy checks of my book, and I have 0 links, and it took forever. So I cannot imagine. But thank you and your team for suffering for the rest of us. So I want to start. I want to ask a couple of specific questions, and then we'll sort of talk about larger things. But one of the things that's great is you break down both traditional financial concepts, but also concepts that I think a lot of people haven't heard and that I never really see in finance books, which I probably read more than the average person. So like for instance, fire, file, and fi, which I the fire bros and I have some beef because I'm just like, dude, live your life. But you break them down, and you even break fire into categories. And I thought that was a really helpful way to, it's really early in the book, but to start was to give people a perspective of like, there's so many different ways that you can choose to build your financial life for how you want to live for the rest of your life, right? And I think we are raised, and you talk about this, right, with the like, you're gonna have kids and retire and blah blah blah, but it's like, no, there are a million different ways to live. So can you break down fire, file, and fi, and then sort of talk about how that's especially applicable to child-free people?
Absolutely. And we can always argue over the terms, and you're right, the fire community gets very specific on it, and they have like, is it coast fi or fat fi, whatever, like there's a lot of them. But one of the challenges is fire's gotten really popular is financial independence, retire early. But a lot of child free folks are like, what if I don't want to retire? What if I like cut back on work, want to do something I enjoy? And I started playing with it, and I created this term called FILE, financial independence, live early. And if you look at fire, it's kind of like an on-off switch for work. When you retire, I am or I'm not working. Where file's more of kind of like a dial where you can like up work, down work, depending on how much you want to do. But it's about really saying, I want to invest in me, the life I want to live, where I want to go. And at the core, both of them have what's called FI, financial independence. And I still like the old school term. They used to call it FU money, where you can tell your boss what to do with your job. Like, I mean, that you get what I mean. That's actually financial independence. But I had Bernadette Joy on, who just also had a book come out, and we were talking about this. And we did an interview just after the election, and there were a lot of folks working on how is this going to impact my life. And she says, "Look, because I have financial independence, I can get up and move. I could do what I have to do. I have the flexibility." And I was like, "Wow, that's important." Like people think about retirement or work and all that, but really, truly, financial independence means if something goes sideways in your life, your work, whatever it is, you have enough that you can be like, I'm out. I'm going to change my life. I'm going to go in a different direction, whatever else it is. And that is a freedom that you just cannot explain.
Yeah. It is. And it's funny because like for me, I love working. I love what I do. My retirement plan is when I'm in my now it's 80s. I get a couple years older and I keep pushing it back. But I'm gonna be a park ranger at Denali. I'm gonna live in Alaska with a little dog, and then just have a little cabin. And then one day I'll die and a bear will eat me, and I'll return to nature. And that's my retirement plan. But like, I don't ever want to stop working, but I really want to be a park ranger at Denali when I'm older, right? But like, yeah, I don't have the idea of, or I'm gonna retire and play golf and I don't know, go on cruises or whatever. And I think particularly for millennials, because our life has always been all about working 12 jobs at once, like, and we're not going to collect Social Security, let's be real. That the idea is, how do we have the finances to be able to do whatever we want, which is like, I love the live early. But also, one of the things that I feel you cover in this book, and particularly we're going to talk about your budgeting system, but one of the things that I think about, because I'm single and child free, so I'm fully responsible for my own economic life and safety. And I just moved from LA to a very small town, and I love LA, but I bought a house with a mortgage that's inexpensive enough that if I lost my job and all of my financial resources tomorrow, I could get a job at Target and still pay my mortgage and my bills, right? And that for me is security, right? Like knowing like I'll still be okay. And you can't do that in Los Angeles. And so I think financially that's really helpful to think about. But one of the things, and it's so funny because it comes up so often on this podcast, is the idea of or the concern about long-term care and care when you're ill. And I can't every guest we end up talking about this and about the fact that, first of all, it's the first thing people say is like, well, who's going to take care of you when you get old, which is a horrible reason to have children. But also an example that I use a lot lately is that my grandmother is 94 and I actually moved here to help take care of her. And she this fall was in the hospital and then a recovery ward in a nursing home for 2.5 months. And she has 4 daughters, granddaughters, etc. And for 2 months, we practically lived there. We did shifts. We were there constantly. But she was the only person in that entire ward of people in their like 70s to 90s who ever had guests, much less regular shifted, right? So I feel like this part of the conversation of planning for care, it's something that child-free people and single people think about, but that everyone needs to think about because it is almost certain that everybody else in that ward had children and grandchildren who just weren't there. So can you talk a little bit about how to approach planning for care, really regardless of whether you're single or child free, to make sure, because, as much as I'd love to be a park ranger at Denali until I'm 150, it's very likely that something could happen to me and I'm going to need help and support. How do I plan for that?
Yeah. And, this question, well, who's going to take care of me when you're older? Like, I have a love-hate thing going on with it. I love it because it allows me to talk about the topic, but I hate it because there's a lot of things implied in there. Like, oh, well, you're obviously assuming your kid's going to take care of you. And let's look at the actual stats. So the US Census looked at adults over 55, and they looked at childless adults, and they said, what percentage of childless adults have any financial support from their family? And the answer was 2.5%.
Oh, wow.
So like, okay, like nothing. But they looked at adults over 55 who are parents, and they found in the same segment that 1.5% of parents got any financial support. So for all you parents that are like, oh, hey, yeah, no. Like, so the truth is we all have to have a plan. And really, planning for who's going to take care when you're older is two parts. One is the question about long-term care, paying for it. And the other one's who's going to make decisions for you. So let's start with kind of the actual cost. And my goal for clients in general is I like to have a plan for long-term care in place by the time you're in mid-40s. And that's not exact, close enough. But the reason we do mid-40s is it's because where long-term care insurance is most affordable. That does not mean it's affordable. It's not, but where it's most affordable. And the numbers are, it costs you about $115,000 a year for a single room in a nursing facility. On average, men will spend 2.2 years in care, women 3.7. Single women have the highest long-term care insurance costs because they use it the most. At least in couples, they're hoping one side takes care of the other or whatever else it is. But it's stupidly expensive, and the cost is going up by 5% every year. And the thing to remember is Medicare does not cover long-term care. Medicaid only covers you after you are broke, after you spent through everything. So you have to have a plan. And I worked as a paramedic for years, and Medicaid facilities because they're just terrible. We used to joke about it, but it's true. Your feet stick to the ground because it's so disgusting in there. And you don't want that care. So the problem is you either have to set aside a boatload of money or buy a long-term care insurance policy to pay for it. And if you're going to self-insure, it really means putting about $500,000 aside just for long-term care. And people talk about, go back to the fire community, they talk about this 4% safe withdrawal rate number that, hey, you need 25 times your expenses to retire. None of that has any consideration for long-term care. So these things just get overlooked. And it's, people get to a point oh, I just don't know what to do. And my answer to them is you need to pick which of these plans you're following. Are you saying, yep, I'm going to rely on Medicaid, whatever that care is? Am I going to pay out of pocket, or am I going to have long-term care insurance? The problem with long-term care insurance is it's impacted by both your health and the health of your parents. So if one of them has Alzheimer's or dementia, your cost probably goes up by about 50%. If both of them have Alzheimer's or dementia, you can't even get insurance. So it's super expensive. And what happens is the longer you wait to get insurance, the more expensive it gets. So it's really hard. And you can't just be I'm not going to make a decision. I do regularly have clients that are hey, I want to take the opt out. They're I want to, follow the suicide pods in Switzerland, death with dignity. Okay. But the problem is you can't change your mind. You can't plan on that your whole life and change your mind so it's a problem. I think the other problem is actually probably harder than figuring out how to pay for it, which is who makes the decisions for you when you can't. So the whole system is based around that your next of kin makes decisions for you. If you don't appoint somebody as your medical power of attorney, financial power of attorney, executor, the government is going to make decisions for you. And I don't care what your political aim is, nobody trusts the government to make decisions for you. It's just a no. And the problem is if you are in California or Arizona, you could appoint a professional fiduciary to take care of this for you. Well, you just moved out of California. You can't.
Well, I'm in actually.
Okay. So you still have an option, but for the other 48 states, you're out of luck. And, I've been working on a solution for this for, almost 3 years now. And we hope to launch a product later this year. We're called the Childfree Trust that will actually be able to serve as child-free folks, executor, power of attorney, and all of that, because it's such a big issue. 32% of child-free folks will never marry. So we're talking a huge population, what we call solos, single with no kids, that don't even have a spouse to kind of fill in the blanks first. And the problem is if you don't fill in the blank and you're hey, I don't have a will, I don't have whatever paperwork. Well, what happens is if you die, there's a good chance the state's going to get your money. I was talking to a banking regulator. I asked him about it. What do you do? How does this process work? And he said, well, we list it on our website, hoping their next of kin finds them. And I'm yeah, I searched all 50 states going, where is my aunt died? Or a cousin or whatever else it is. And the reason they don't search hard is because they get it if they don't find somebody. So you have to have paperwork because otherwise the government's making decisions for you and they're taking your money. Nobody wants that.
Jay, you're freaking me out. So all right, look, now that I and the listeners are terrified, let's go into what we can do.
Go. Hey, come on, you know. I mean, you come out of being a lawyer. If you don't have your paperwork in place, you're out of luck.
No, you're right. I mean, and the thing is, and we're going to talk a little bit about policy later, but it's these things are expensive. There are no really good solutions. We all need to be millionaires, and which isn't going to happen. And it is. It's really scary. But that's why, it's why we read books like yours to try to do the best we can. So You have a really unique budgeting system. I'm in the middle of the spreadsheet that came with the book right now. It's what I'll be doing on my Friday night, single girl Friday night, doing
Party! Oh, wait.
um, but can you talk about, first of all, talk a little bit about some of the traditional budgeting models that you sort of always see if you Google how to budget or ask ChatGPT, and then talk about yours. And one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is for I'm like, you just freaked me out. So like, how are we, how do we use this budget to be sure that they don't end up in a state-run Medicare facility?
Yeah, well, that's going to go into your bigger financial plan, not just your budget. But I think the challenge is, I think of budgets like diets. They all kind of work. It just depends on which one works for you. It's not like one is better than the other. People like this one. But the bottom line is you have to have a plan for your money before the month starts. And like, I'm not like, you've got to plan down to every penny and you can't have your latte or whatever, dumb statement it is this week. But you have to have a plan for your money. That includes spending money, enjoying money, but you have to have a deliberate plan, because otherwise what happens is you either mindlessly spend or mindlessly save. I see a bit of both, and neither's good. We want to have a plan that matches your goals, gets you what you want. And we use something we call the money management system. And it's just a simple way to look at your finances, but it breaks things into four categories: must, shoulds, coulds, and won'ts. It's actually based off a time management system. I use that in time management too. I must get this done. When I get my must done, I move to my shoulds. When I get to my shoulds done, I can go to my coulds, and it prioritizes. So in must, it's everything you have to pay to keep a roof over your head, basic utilities, basic insurance. Just like if you were broke, working at Target, as you just said, just barely paying for the house, what bills would you pay? And I often have debates with folks because they're like, well, my cell phone has to be in a must. I go, well, I mean, is that keeping the roof over your head? Like, do you need the big plan on your cell phone, or can you cut back on it? Like we can, but I'm trying to get people to think through the idea. And I'll give you a great example. Your groceries are a must. Like, I must have food. Dining out is a could. It's something I can do. And as you start pulling it apart, what I often find is people add up their must, and these are the bills you have to pay every month, electric bill, whatever else it is, the minimum payments, your credit cards, if you have them. And if that total monthly amount is more than you take home each month, you got a big problem. And it's amazing to me how many times, and you brought up LA, it's a great example. I had a client, their one bedroom in LA, I think it was like $4,000 a month. It was like, I mean, crazy. I could not imagine that. And I was like, there has to be some place there wasn't really. And I was like, I added up their musts, and I'm like, your musts are more than your monthly take home. This just, I can't, there's no way to budget this. And people are like, well, but this is what I have to pay. I'm like, this is not sustainable. There's no way for you to make ends meet. I mean, ultimately, you need to spend less than you make, which sounds simple, but that's hard. And what happens is when you start with musts, it gets you to look at it. Once you start with your musts and you have every dollar left, you can go back to what you should pay money on. And this is where people get mad at me, and that's okay. I follow a no debt approach. I don't think you should be carrying consumer debt in particular, because it's stealing you from your future. Credit cards, 20, 30%, you're paying that extra per year. I always love with folks, I will take their credit card balance, multiply it by whatever their APR is. Let's say it's 25%. And I'll be like, okay, on that money, it's costing you X amount per year to carry that. They're like, it is? Like, they just don't do the math. It's like, oh, I can pay the monthly payment. I can afford it. And, if you got a $10,000 bill, it's cost you $2,500 a year in interest just to have it. So in your shoulds, you're going to outline things like, I should have a sinking fund for my car repairs. I should be paying for disability insurance if I'm a child-free folk. If you have debt, I should be paying that off each month. And where they get really mad at me is you got to pay off your debt before you get to the coulds, which is like your fun stuff. They're like, are you telling me I can never go out to eat? And I'm like, well, if you're going to put it on your credit card and you're going to end up paying 25% interest on that, no, like you can go enjoy it when you are out of debt. And that sounds really harsh, but you have to stop taking out debt to get out and you have to prioritize your spending.
Well, and we live in this culture of debt, so it feels normal. And so it's hard for people to even realize, oh, I shouldn't just always have a balance on my credit card because we just live in a culture where everyone does and it feels like you're supposed to.
Yeah, but just because everyone doesn't mean you should. And that's part of the problem. We're all living different lives. We have different, money we can handle. We got different situations. We're like, well, I should have a better apartment. I should buy a house. I should. Okay, doesn't mean you can, and just because somebody says you should doesn't mean you have to. And the problem is we start comparing against each other. We get stuck in this game. And on social media, we see people's like whatever they're showing off, but you don't see that giant debt behind it and that they're drowning in it. And I think the hard part is we as a society, we've kind of bought into this debt. And don't get me started on kind of the debate about good debt versus bad debt. It's all debt. Like, just be real on that. And if you truly want financial independence, the first step is get on a budget, get out of debt, build an emergency fund. The first steps we call the program, we call no baby steps. First step is a basic emergency fund. Second, get out of debt. Third is a fully funded emergency fund. That is the financial foundation. You can't like make more money on your investments than your debt. You can't pass go, collect $200 until you do the first things.
And it's, this is a message that the kids desperately need. And this is not a joke, every single Gen Zer who I've hired within 6 months has come to me and asked for a raise because they moved into an apartment they can't afford. And then I've had to explain how jobs work. But I get it's not because they're dumb, it's because no one has taught them these sort of basic financial things. And you're right. Then they see online or whatever, they're like, oh, I got a job, I should get a bigger apartment. And then they realize they can't afford it. And I always have to say, I can't give you a raise just because you got an apartment you can't afford. But we're not teaching these basic steps. And it's starting to hurt young people at younger and younger ages.
It is, we first off, we set them off terribly with college debt. I mean, I don't get how you can be 18 and signing for $100,000 debt. Like that I just don't get that logic. I mean, the 8-year-old version of me was dumb. I'm just going to call that out. Like, I should not be signing a loan for $100,000. And there are other ways to do school. I mean, I went from 0 degree to PhD in 5.5 years, and the total cost was less than $9,000. You can game the system and get there, but it's much harder.
That'll be your next book because my education cost a lot more than that. And I was 17 when I started getting saddled with those debts. And I have 2 years until my public service loan forgiveness kicks in. And I swear I will start a riot myself if anything happens to the Department of Education before my loans are forgiven. Yeah, we need, but it's a thing that's expected and everyone just tells you have to do and you're a kid and what do you know. You said something and I wanted to just get you to define what a sinking fund is. My car fund came in handy just yesterday and I was like, thank God I have this. So can you talk a little bit about it for people who don't know?
Yeah, so a sinking fund is money put aside, and I try to put everything you're doing down to a monthly payment, X amount per month for bigger expenses. So the auto sinking fund is a great example of like if you have a car, you're gonna have to replace the tires eventually. You got to do oil changes. You might do your brakes, whatever it is. There is an ongoing cost to maintenance for a car, and I've played with numbers for cars, and most cars is like $1,000 a year. Now it might not be every year. Some years it might be less. Some years it might be more. But and it depends. If your car's really old, it might be more than that. But you're going to have some repairs to do. Well, if you have to like replace your tires, and I had to do this for my wife's car. It was like $800. That hurts. But if I'm putting aside like $100 a month towards a sinking fund, I'm putting money in there that I can take out later for those big expenses. Another example I use in there is gifts. If you're a big gift giver, maybe you celebrate Christmas, you're going to be giving gifts once a year. Don't put it off till Christmas. You put aside X amount per month towards it. Whatever that may be. If you have a house, on average, the house costs you 1% of the house value each year in maintenance. There's just general rules of you should set aside this because you're going to have to pay it at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. If anyone listening if there's one thing that you take away and are like, I can start this today, let me tell you, a sinking fund. Just yesterday, I was like, thank God, because I would be in real trouble if I didn't have this. So you have suggestions like the sinking fund in the book that are very practical and that I like. And one of the things that you talk about is your prepaid debit card idea. And for a person, when I moved from LA to rural Arizona, all of a sudden I started using Amazon a lot more because there's just a lot of stuff I can't get here. And then I realized, and you say in your book, if I get an Amazon pack, because you also live in a rural place, so there's no such thing as next day shipping here, even if they say there is. And so sometimes I'll get an Amazon package like 3 days after I order it, and I'll be like, what's in here? Which you're right, probably means I don't need it. So can you talk about your prepaid debit card idea and how that can help control spending?
Yeah, I don't know about you, but Amazon is my area of spending that should be on my won't list. But I don't know. Like I'll be like, oh, I need blank, and I just throw it on Amazon, and you have a problem when the package starts showing up, and you're like, what did I buy? I probably should just turn it around, but I never do. And the thing is, what Amazon has done, and most places have now copied, is they've made it really easy to buy things. That's the one click. And it's connected to your credit card, and you just kind of mindlessly spend money. And then it gets to the end of the month, you're like, how did I spend that much on Amazon? My other favorite one, people, how much money did I spend on DoorDash? Like, whatever it is, whatever pick your poison. And the answer is if you have a problem where you're spending too much money online on anything, I had somebody else that had a lot of problems with spending too much money on online phone games, whatever it is, you need to take your credit card off and switch to a prepaid debit card. So the old school way of budgeting, they call it the envelope method. So you put an envelope aside, you put some cash in it. When the envelope is empty, you're out of money for that month. Wait till next month. Well, this is the new version way of it. You run to Walmart, you get a prepaid debit card. There's a whole bunch of different version ones that you can refill online. And you say, all right, my Amazon budget for this month is $100. You put $100 on there. You take all of your credit cards off Amazon. You put your prepaid debit card. Well, here's what's going to happen. When you get to the point you run out of money, it's going to bounce and it's not going to let you buy it. And it helps. It's like one of those kind of steps that you get there. Another one that works well, and there's a lot of folks, is a 24-hour hold before buying anything. So you can add it to your cart, but you can't finish the sales for the purchase for 24 hours. And what happens, a lot of us, and myself included, so I'm not saying I'm special on this, do a bit of retail therapy. I'm not feeling well. What do I do? Add to cart, and it's just true. Well, the kind of the science behind this is that you get the, dopamine hit for buying it when you add it to the cart. The next day you go back and you're like, do I still really want that? And you might still want it, so you just go through with it, or you don't. And the other fun one is, depending on the site you're shopping on, you leave it in the cart, you haven't finished. Don't be surprised you get a coupon the next day. Hey, here's 20% off because I saw you didn't finish your order. Well, then I really might want it. It's like these little things that you can put into your life, and you don't think it'll add up to much, but it does. It's just putting some mindfulness around your spending.
Yeah, I love that. All right. We're going to dive into the other thing other than long-term care that freaks people out, including me. And you actually had very different advice than I've ever read about this. So insurance, which feels like a real nightmare. And the thing that everyone feels like they're supposed to get is life insurance. And you write in the book all about how that doesn't really make sense if you don't have anyone who is depending on your salary. but you talk about disability insurance. So can you talk a little bit about all of these sort of insurance matters and also how we get started if it seems overwhelming?
Yeah. So the thing to remember about insurance, and I just want to kind of warn everybody, is someone selling insurance can call themselves a financial advisor, but all they're doing is selling life insurance, or all they're doing, like, they don't necessarily have your best interest in mind. And this is particularly an issue for child free folks. If you're single with no kids, who's relying on you for your income? The answer is you. And when you're dead, you don't need it. Let's just call that out. I hate to be morbid, but let's just call it what it is. And the challenge is, you get sold life insurance. Like, well, the general rule is you need 10 to 12 times your income in life insurance. Well, life insurance job is to take care of your income when you're gone if somebody's relying on it. If you're in a couple and you're dual income couple, your spouse might be okay without you. Like, it's based on the old ways, the old, mom stayed at home, never worked. The dad had to have life insurance because, it's all these like old fashioned thoughts that are built in there that don't fit us. On the other hand, if you're single with no kids, we call you a soloist. If you're a soloist and you get injured, you're out of luck. Now, Social Security disability will pay eventually. They tend to deny you for a while, so just be aware of that. But Social Security disability pays very little. I'm talking like 1,200, 1,500 bucks a month, like less than your housing. You can't live on that. So I say for child-free folks, disability insurance is a must, where life insurance is I probably don't need that. And there are those out there, especially on social media, they're selling a lot of life insurance. Like you'll hear IULs and infinite banking and all this stuff. What they're really trying to sell you is a product that's a combination of life insurance and investing. And the result is a spork. It's a spoon and a fork that do neither job well. What it does, it does make the guy commissions. And they can advertise it on social media because it's not regulated. Like they're just selling you stuff you don't need. I mean, I talked to one of the insurance companies, and their goal is for your monthly life insurance payment to be the same as your mortgage. That is ridiculous. Somebody in my team asked me, how is that legal? Well, it's because they're not regulated. They can sell you whatever they want. On the other hand, disability insurance, they don't really make any money on. So they don't talk about it. If you're working for yourself, there's actually a group called the Freelancers Union. You can join, you can get a group policy. If you're working for an employer, you can get it. Disability insurance covers 60 to 70% of your salary. If you pay for it out of pocket, you actually get it tax free if you get disabled. And there's a pretty good chance you're going to get disabled sometime in your life. I was working with a client, and he's in his 50s and had a stroke, and he's a lawyer. Guess what? Having a stroke and being a lawyer do not go hand in hand. This is not possible. So now he's out of his career for the rest of his life. Good thing he's got disability insurance because that pays the bills. These are the types of things we need to think about.
All right, we're adding that to my Friday night list. Another thing, same question, but for wills.
So I encourage every child-free person, I don't care what age you are, you got to get the paperwork done. You got to get a will, got to get a medical power of attorney, financial power of attorney. You may or may not need a trust. That's a separate question, but you need to have basic paperwork. And I'm going to give you this, going to add this to your Friday list. There's a website. It's called freewill.com. Like, it's keyword free. And like I like what they're doing because they're actually trying to encourage people to give to charity and all of that things. You can go get the paperwork done. You might have to like go get a notary. It might cost, like the UPS stores, a notary cost you $15. Not a big deal, but you've got to get the paperwork done. And people are like, yeah, I always love this one. People are like, oh, well, if I fill out my will, I'm going to die. You're going to die no matter what. Okay. Like, you're not going to dodge it. Like, it just is what it is. But you've got to get the paperwork done. The questions about who takes care of you and all that, that's harder. Tune in later. I'll come back and talk about it. We're hoping to launch a product later this year. It is a challenge to figure out who makes the decisions for you. but you have to pick someone. Otherwise, we're going to the government. And I just don't like that.
And can you just maybe give some examples for folks about who do people leave their estates to, of varying sizes, when they pass away? If they don't have children, what are some common or interesting things that you've seen?
Yeah. So the first thing is that most child free folks embrace something closer to what we call die with zero, where they're like, I'm not going to pass on money to the next generation. My wife and I, we're going to give our money to our nephews. If they get 10 grand or 100 grand, I'm fine with that. If they get $1 million, I made a mistake. And the mistake is I can actually help them more during their life than if I'm like 90 when I die and they're in their 60s, they probably don't need the money then. I can help them with their college. I can help them with other things earlier in life, or I could just use the money and enjoy it myself. You don't have to leave money to family. You don't have to leave money to anybody. It is your money. You get to do whatever you want with it. And I'll ask folks kind of like, what is the impact you want to make? And I'm going to give you guys a tough question. Please just, work this through. And I'm going to ask you this question. So you're going to have to answer it, which is, what does the second line of your obituary say? So if you're a parent, the first, it usually says first line, like Jay died at this age. The second line is like father of three, leaves behind Jack, Joe, and John. But that's not going to be for us. What does the second line of your obituary say? And what should happen is your money, both in life and when you pass, should go towards that. I've seen people give a whole lot of money to their pets. By the way, your will also specifies who gets your pets. I've seen people give to all different types of charities. I had somebody the other day who is donating to all different national parks. Maybe yours goes to Denali. I don't know, but it should match the second line of your obituary. So what's your line say?
Well, that's easy for me because my life's work is the thing that's important to me. So the second line of my obituary says that I was instrumental in making sure that every American in the country had an ID.
Perfect. So your money in your will should go to that. There are initiatives that you can fund on the way out that match that.
Well, it's my initiative, but yes,
yeah. But there's ones that will continue past you, hopefully.
Yeah, we'll go to my org. And actually, that was a question that I had for you: is can I set up, or do you recommend setting up a life insurance policy so that if I die before I accomplish my goal, that it would go to my nonprofit so I could continue working? Is that a thing you can do?
You can set up a life insurance and give it to whoever you want. I mean, that does work. Whether or not that makes sense, that's a different question. But if you have like a specific goal, like I want to give $1 million to my nonprofit, great. And you can name the nonprofit. And interestingly enough, some nonprofits will actually pay for the policy because they're like, I get the money at the end. Although I always feel weird about that. Like that's somebody like hoping I die. They're not really, but kind of like they're waiting for my money. It does work. That is one case where it might make sense to leave money in a life insurance policy, but only a term life policy. For the next whatever 10 years, 20 years, whatever it is, I'm going to do that. And then otherwise, maybe it's my estate.
All right, I'm gonna look into that. But only because it's my nonprofit. I don't know if I do that for anyone else's. Okay. So a lot of this stuff that we're talking about, wills and estates, and having extra money for insurance, and who we're giving our money to. It's really good for folks who feel financially stable, but there are a lot of people, and particularly sinks, who are living paycheck to paycheck, and this all sounds like a real luxury, and even just paying debt sounds like a real luxury. So for people who are just getting started or who are not financially in a place where they can think about sort of all of these sort of big picture things yet, where do they start?
So I think, let's be real. There's two phases of life. The first phase is kind of what we call the rent and ramen phase, where you're barely making enough money to pay for rent and ramen. Right? If you're in that phase, you're right. I don't have extra money to invest. I don't have extra money to plan for long-term care. Like, I don't. And when you're in that phase, the first step is to be aware of what's going on. And one of the challenges is when you're living paycheck to paycheck, often it's because debt's kind of taking stuff away, especially if you're using, payday loans, things like that. I mean, those hurt. For soloists, the cost to be single across your life, they call it the single tax, is somewhere between $400,000 and $1 million across your life. That's extra money because you can't split the apartment, you can't split the electric, you can't whatever it is, and that is tough. When you lay out your budget and that must shoulds coulds, you need to figure out, do you even have enough money to make it through? And if you don't, what do I need to change? And really, there's only two things you can change. I either make more money or have lower expenses, which may mean some hard choices like moving out of LA. You have to take control of that. And I think one of the challenges is people feel so deep down that like I can't make progress and they just don't look. Like I don't want to see it. I don't want to, work through this. I just had on my podcast Shanna Game, and she's got a new book coming out about kind of working through your money trauma and where you're at. And great book. And she has an anecdote in there about how she never looked at her ATM receipts because she was worried about what it said. Like she had a way to game it so that she knew exactly how much time it was, throw it away. But like you have to take the time to look. You have to take the time to have a plan. If you're single, one of the challenges is you don't have somebody kind of helping to hold you accountable. So find a friend. For my first book, I did a bunch of interviews of child-free folks, and I found out people are way more interested to talk about their sex life than they are their finances. Well, find a friend that you can talk to about your finances. We can hold each other accountable. We all make mistakes. You're never going to get the budget right. But are you making improvements month over month where they can call you out on your BS? Like, they can look at your numbers with you and go, why are you spending so much on X? A silly example of this, my wife and I moved from being on Verizon to Mint Mobile. Mint Mobile across the year, it's, I don't know, $30 a month for unlimited for us, like cheap. Where Verizon was like $150 a month. Same service. Like there's these small things you can do. And if you have an accountability partner, you can do it for each. Because you're like, hey, I found this. Hey, I found that. You can start making progress. But you have to be willing to share your stuff. And that's hard. I mean, let's just call that out. And there's systemic issues to it. There's a whole bunch. I mean, we can do a whole nother episode on that. But we can't change the system today. We can fight over time to get there, but we can start by supporting each other and being accountability for each other.
I think that's so important. And, it's, I know so many people who have said like, oh, I never look at my bank balance. I can't even open it. I don't even, and it's like, no, that's the first thing. And I actually had a friend in LA who started a finance group for a bunch of her girlfriends, and we would just get around and talk very honestly about money. And it was really helpful and really refreshing. I really recommend it. But one of the things that I like, and the reason I like that you started your book with Fire, File, and Fire, and you really started by saying, look, you have the opportunity, particularly being child free, to fully take control of what your life looks like. But you have to plan for it and you have to own it. It's not a thing you can do by accident. And I think particularly in this economy, in this world, we're not going to just like trip to financial independence or even stability, right? Like eggs cost $20 each. We really have to think about these things. And then and I felt that because you started the book that way, it felt so empowering and hopeful. So even when I was reading like the long-term care things and the things that really scare me, it was still like, okay, but I know that if I think about this now, I'm going to be okay when I'm a park ranger at Denali. So I'm glad that you framed it the way you did, because I feel like it's really helpful. So my last question then is, for anyone who, like me, is now going to spend their Friday night going through this book and going to freewill.com and whatever else, or for anyone who's listening and is like, all right, I'm going to read this book. This feels like a lot. And what is the first thing, just like one small thing that I can do today that's going to make me feel like I'm starting to set myself up for success, and that is going to give give me that sort of the feeling of accomplishment and hopefulness that will help me push through all the other steps.
Okay, and this is going to sound bad, but just go with me. Stop Googling things, especially financial things. Like, like you go to Dr. Google and you got a medical issue. You Google enough, you end up with cancer. Like, people like, one of the ones that drives me crazy is, well, by 30, I have to have X, and by 40, I should like that. None of that matches your life. Like, we need to stop comparing against everybody else, and we need to find a plan that we can follow. Yeah, I'd love you to pick up my book. It's got a lot of things in there. And what it says is, start where you're at and stop when you get overwhelmed. Like, you don't have to read the whole book. If you're on no baby step one, which is build a basic emergency fund, we're working on a budget, just do that. By the way, you do the will at the same time, because you can find the $15, to get it notarized. In some states, you could just have witnesses. It doesn't even cost you that, but you can start. I think the other part of it is you need to give yourself a little grace. We've all done stupid stuff. Okay. I grew up, my family was broke. My father drove bus. My mother was disabled most of my life. We never had money. I didn't learn how to manage money. I actually, by pure dumb luck somewhat, I ended up in the .com world in the late 90s, made my first million by the time I was 21, spent it by the time I was 25. All right. That's just what happens. You give a 21-year-old $1 million. That's what they do. I could beat myself up about that, or I can change my future. People are always like, well, I shouldn't have taken up that student loan. I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have. Yeah. Okay, great. You acknowledge you made a mistake. You pay the stupid tax, you move forward. I just do it. And I think we beat ourselves up so much that the result is we're just paralyzed. Pick a plan. It could be my book, it could be another book. I don't care what it is. Run it until it falls off. Do not start a new plan. Do not Google. Do not try to make it complex. Simple works. And just when you do your budget for the first month and you make mistakes, just give yourself a little bit of grace. Like, none of us are perfect at this.
I think that is the perfect way to end this. Thank you so much. I love this book. I think it's so important. I think that, even if you're listening, if you just take it in small chunks, read a chapter a month or whatever, but it really is helpful. And as much as it is written for and so important for child-free people, there were so many things that I read in here that I was like, oh, I know a lot of people who need this, whether they have children or not. So thank you. Thank you so much for writing it, for coming on. And I would love to have you back when you guys have the child-free trust and everything, because I'd love to talk about that. I think that's really important too.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and of course, leave a review. Until next week, here's hoping you find joy in your solo life.